to get people to come in on the platform. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the People Strategy Forum podcast. So we're a show that guides leaders how to elevate the workforce. And we believe that people are at the heart of every successful organization. And team members' well-being and their rewards and career development, it's all essential to a happy, healthy, and highly productive workforce. So this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for our top executives and senior professionals and talent managers overall. And so I would like to introduce to you some of our hosts that we have on the call today. So of course we have Shar Miller, and Shar Miller is what I like to call a serial entrepreneur. She's got tons of irons in the fire, basically a mountain and sea career strategy and health advocacy, and she's a seasoned chief HR officer, and so a lot of information you can get from Shar. She is known for HR with a heart. And then, of course, we have Howard Niswitz. Howard is a seasoned compensation advisor and strategic HR consultant with over 30 years of experience. And so Howard and I used to work together at Barclays, and I'm fortunate to be back with him now. So thank you, Howard, for joining us. And then, of course, we have Sumit Singla. Sumit Singla is an experienced HR consultant. He's dedicated to helping those small to medium-sized enterprises. He's known as the culture guy, and he has a deep level of expertise of working at companies such as Accenture, Deloitte, Aon, and GE. So Sumit brings a wealth of knowledge, and we're fortunate to have him here today. So thank you, Sumit. And then, of course, I want to go into our speakers today. We have both Lee and Crystal, and from Newmeasures. And I would love to have Lee and you tell us a little bit about your organization and the clients that you help and so forth, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having us today. I'm Lee Stroud. I am owner and president of Newmeasures. We are a boutique firm of industrial organizational psychologists specializing in designing and implementing employee listening strategies. We focus primarily on small to mid-market organizations, and that really was an intentional move on our part. We find that we can really form solid partnerships with our clients in that space and really feel like we're having an impact on all the things that you said, Sam, opening up the call. You know, we do believe that when employees can thrive, the organizations can thrive, and we want to continue to help HR teams figure out how to connect those dots. I've been personally consulting in this space for over 20 years, and as you will probably hear, I'm originally from Alabama, so my accent's probably going to start coming out during our time today, and moved to Colorado for grad school. And as we were talking earlier with Crystal, once you come to Colorado, it's a little hard to leave. So been here ever since, and really just following an organic path in my career, and I had an opportunity to take over ownership in Newmeasures, and knew it was not only an opportunity to continue my own personal passion in the space, but to create a space where we can internally grow amazing leaders, and especially female leaders. We are a certified women-owned small business, and I'm really passionate about growing, women leaders on our team. So I'll let Crystal say hello and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today. I'm Crystal Robertson. I serve as a senior consultant at Newmeasures, and my path to employee listening and employee experience space was a little meandering. I have spent most of my career in the healthcare industry, and most specifically in healthcare quality. So my background is in quality and process improvement, and it's part of that. Change management is a huge piece in the way that the people show up in the change management and improvement process is incredibly important as well. So anything that we're doing to improve efficiency and effectiveness in process, we know takes the people buy-in, support, and doing it on behalf of the healthcare workers that I worked with was a huge passion of mine. Lee mentioned industrial organizational psychology is the foundation of a lot of the lens that we're looking at Newmeasures, and that's my education and training background. So I'm fascinated by the study of human behavior at work, and am always looking for ways to help support employees, knowing that that supports the organization overall as well. So excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, so that's a real neat topic. I mean, I love the industrial psychology and talking about that. The one thing that I noticed, because I spent a lot of time in Europe, and about 15 years ago, I used to talk to some of my colleagues here, and they would talk a lot about that particular profession. And it wasn't really well known in the States as much, so I think Europe really got the jump on us there as far as bringing the meat of that content out. And I'm so glad to hear that it is flourished in the US now as well. So that's deeply needed. I mean, when we think about the important part of work, it's more than just, getting things done. It's about how we get it done as humans, right? So.
Absolutely. That's so interesting, Sam, to hear that. Yeah, and IO psychology is a smaller subfield of psychology, certainly, and it helps to be able to view the world that way, and help to and how we measure the employee experience, everything from what motivates us as individual humans and how we show up for work.
Mm-hmm. And we'll certainly mention it in a bit, but I think COVID really elevated the human experience at work. And, interestingly, related to our topic today, through our employee listening, we saw engagement levels spike in COVID, which was maybe an unanticipated trend. And it's something that I think, employees are really demanding out of their workplace. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today, about how organizations can support that, because it is absolutely what people need to thrive, is to feel connected to each other as humans and be recognized as individuals.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit more. So what does employee listening mean in today's context?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll talk a little bit about where it's been. We'll focus a lot on where we are today and a little bit about where we see that going. It really has evolved, Sam. Employee listening used to be your, annual, maybe every other year satisfaction survey. It was a check the box initiative. Are people happy? Do they like their comp and ben? They never like their comp and ben. You don't need to ask the question. And, it was a very antiquated process that took a lot of effort, a lot of time. And so organizations couldn't do it very frequently. And, then once they got the data, and that might even be months after, they actually took the survey, people really weren't sure what to do with it. And so what we've seen is it's really evolved, and I think a lot due to the science of industrial organizational psychology, in saying that, satisfaction is fine. And what we really care about are where the behaviors change. What are those experiences for employees that are going to create that discretionary effort when people are really going above and beyond to take care of the organization? And so, IOs really spent time to define what does engagement look like, and how do we impact it? How do we focus on the things that we can control? I'll let Krista maybe speak a little bit more about what we're seeing specifically in engagement. It has evolved, as I mentioned. COVID has really changed what we know to be some of those key drivers of engagement. So maybe you can speak to that in a little bit of our paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's really well said. When we think about employee satisfaction and measurements of satisfaction of the past, we know that satisfaction doesn't actually impact how engaged we are as employees, right? We can be completely content and satisfied in the work that we're doing, and it doesn't mean that we're necessarily engaged in the work. So it can impact, satisfaction can impact retention. It'll maybe be the impetus for us to continue to stay with the organization that we're working in, but it's not necessarily going to impact productivity or some of those other outcome metrics that we see. So moving from employee satisfaction to this idea of employee engagement, to start to understand better the employee experience, but not only But not only that, we're interested in what makes people feel motivated and committed to go above and beyond in their work. Why do they get out of bed in the morning to show up at work? And we're measuring that discretionary effort from employees. And so when we think about what we're learning right now in terms of the present and what impacts engagement, it's a lot of different things. There you'll see a link to our 2023 New Measures State of Engagement white paper that includes what we've learned and what those key drivers of engagement are, what matters most to employees. So for example, creating a sense of community and belonging is a top driver of engagement. I see Sam's put the white paper there and the link in the chat, so you can access that. Creating a sense of community and belonging is the top driver of engagement that we're seeing across our clients right now. And that is different than what we've seen in the past. 5 years ago, our clients weren't even asking survey items about belonging in the workplace. So it wasn't even on the organization's radar. And now it's something that is the top driver of engagement. Other things that we're seeing that are important to employees are being recognized for the work that they're doing, focusing on how to grow their career and achieving their career goals is another driver of engagement. And having an organization that's focused on a clear direction and inspiring vision for the organization is another key driver. Those are our top 5 drivers that we're seeing across our clients right now.
That's
We're
really
also seeing
go ahead, Lee.
We're also seeing an emphasis on wellness and well-being. And again, I think a lot of that really was highlighted in COVID. Is it that the employee experience has changed, or is it that we now are recognizing more, complex facets of the employee experience? That's for another conversation. But it does highlight the need that measurement can't be static. And I think that that's also a trend that we're still trying to get organizations to break free of, because we love data and we want to trend data so that we can make predictions. And we still need to be able to do that. And, employee listening has to evolve and meet employees where they are now. It also has to tie and align with the organization's strategy. So the surveys that we design for our clients, no two are alike, because no two organizations have the same strategy, the same culture, the same challenges. And so we want to make sure it's rooted in science, that we know that we're capturing what the research tells us are the key drivers of engagement, and not be afraid to flex and listen for the things even that we don't know we need to be listening for.
That's great. That was when you were talking about the top 5 things. I mean, that really resonated with me too, because Howard and I have been having a ton of discussions just lately in listening to what people and leaders are looking for, and those dominantly came up in every discussion. Especially recognition was surprisingly is moving its way up as well. I think that there's a lot of focus on recognition right now, because we are in somewhat of a tough marketplace. The economy is a bit down, and recognition really has found to gain a lot, give a lot of traction and motivating, engaging people with when you have a very limited budget available to you, right? So it's
right. There's a lot of ways that you can go about doing that.
It's so challenging though, because firms have been kind of tossing around engagement now for years, and it's not a one size fits all. It's you really need to understand the population, and it becomes quite, I think, complex in terms of how do you tailor to meet the needs of the various folks that work for you.
And Howard, what we're seeing is, I think, where this measurement is going is moving beyond engagement to really understanding the broader employee experience. Interestingly, there's really no common definition of what that means or what that looks like. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolve in the next, year to two. And the way that we might start to think about that is really understanding what are the moments that matter across the employee life cycle. And we are seeing some of that measurement pop up in formal and hopefully informal ways. So that's something else to know, that employee listening doesn't always mean a survey. Yes, we are a survey company, and that's what we do. And we like to promote those informal ways of listening as well. As you were saying, Sam, recognition, you don't need technology to do that. You don't need a budget to do that, to have a meaningful conversation and to say thank you in a way that resonates with that person. So certainly incorporating the informal listening and looking at things like life cycle surveys. So what is the onboarding experience? We have data that can, clearly tie expectations for career growth in the first 90 days to someone's likelihood to leave the organization. So we know that that can be a critical moment for people coming into the organization. Return from parental leave. Again, what are those moments or those milestones in an employee's experience, a change of manager, where we really want to know and lean into what they're experiencing and understanding if there are things that we could be doing differently to support them through that.
Yeah, that's measuring this stuff is so hard, and I mean it can be difficult. I mean to make sure that we're asking the right questions. But the workforce experience is something that we have been thinking about and deeply for a long time. I mean, Howard and I have been writing articles, and recently Smith and I have put together a book on the topic, and so I'd love to share it with you. It's a lot of fun. But but you mentioned technology, and how has technology changed the landscape on how we measure these things effectively and can report it in a more timely basis?
Yeah, this is a hot topic for me. I have a love-hate relationship with technology. Technology can do great things for employee listening, and my mantra has always been, technology is not going to solve your people problems. It's not the solution. It should support and enable the solution. So, as I mentioned, of course, people were only listening maybe once a year because it was a paper process. All of that data had to be manually tabulated and entered and then analyzed. And the whole process would take months. And so by the time you're rolling out the results, people forgot what they even said on the survey. And so it created this lag. And I think that was a big impact on why action really wasn't being taken. Now, technology has become very cost effective. We have ways to really engage with employees where they are and in their normal course of work, especially for non-desk workers. That's been really important. We have manufacturing companies that, they've been maybe the last ones to jump on board. And, we know that we can leverage technology to make it really easy for their line workers to participate and get their important feedback. So, it's easy to get connected with employees. It's cost effective. It can quickly analyze the data so that we're really shortening that time on the back end. And we've seen people make that be the solution. So now we're going to do pulse surveys, once a quarter, once a month. We're going to use those little smiley icons to, gauge sentiment. And they don't know what problem they're trying to solve. They're just capturing data. And data does not necessarily equate to insight. And so that's something, again, that we're really passionate about, because as you said, Sam, you have to do this in an intentional way, especially if you've got multiple touch points that you're assessing across the life cycle. There has to be a common thread from a measurement perspective so that we can connect the data in a meaningful way. That's step one. Step two is making sure that we're able to visualize that so that people can really understand how they're connected. And I'm going to let Crystal speak a little bit to the data transparency and data literacy component of that. Before I get there, I'll just say that I think the biggest component moving forward that people are most excited about is AI. And, once again, I think we have to be careful of the new shiny, bright object and getting distracted because AI is going to solve all of our people problems. I do think it's going to have a big impact. And I think the best way it's going to do that is by, harnessing all of the unstructured data. So open comment feedback, and however organizations want to apply that. A good example is in exit interviews. So we can connect exit interviews with exit surveys. So we have the quantitative and qualitative data. And AI is really good at synthesizing all of that information and being able to really tell us what people are saying. So I think that's going to be the best use case for it. And as with all of this, if your frontline leaders don't know what to do with the information, there's no point. And so that's another real passion of ours, is really making sure we're equipping frontline leaders to use this data as insight and not initiative. So we like to say that the survey data is the how. You've already decided the what, right? The organization has decided the what people are doing. The data from a survey should inform how you're doing it. So once you have that in your culture and that's ingrained and embedded, then you can use technology to your heart's desire, and you can, survey as frequently as you want to. And so I think, again, we're really trying to help clients get that fundamental in place before we're really unleashing the technology. So Crystal, share some examples with your clients around the data transparency and literacy component.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. I think, just again, to summarize some of the tactical applications of AI that we're using, before we get there, is allowing us to identify common themes. So, when we're taking that unstructured and open-ended feedback, we're able to aggregate and summarize it in a meaningful way so that our organizations know what themes are coming up in terms of those open-ended comments and summarizing overall sentiment. And as you mentioned, technology is not necessarily the solution, but should be aligned with the action planning approach of the organization. I think that's an important point too, is that depending on what approach the organization has identified in terms of action planning, you can align the technology solution to help support that. Taking action is critically important in this process. So making sure, asking for feedback isn't enough. We need to, it's what we do with the feedback that matters. And so we can't just ask it. Our employees are looking for us to do something meaningful with it. Yes, I'm sorry, Aisha.
Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was in charge of employee engagement for 11 hospitals, kind of like the lead consultant for all the other hospitals. And I even was getting burned out with the employee surveys. I mean, even in charge of it, partly because of my frustration as an HR leader, that we collect all this data and we would take all the commentary, which was thousands upon thousands of comments, believe it or not, right? And the executives would say, yeah, we're going to sit and read all these comments. No, not necessarily. I actually watched a lot of executives get very defensive about the feedback, almost to a visceral response. Actually, I even heard that from one of the executives, that it made them really angry.
Yeah.
And sitting around going, well, wait a minute, obviously there is an underlying resentment towards this organization and a resentment towards the executive leadership. So when you get brutally honest feedback about the culture and what we can do differently to improve communication, a real good leader is not going to get defensive with the feedback and not make people feel fearful to answer honestly on the surveys, because oftentimes there were such negative repercussions for honest feedback, to the point where the leaders would be upset with their employees because they gave candid feedback.
I love what you're saying, Char. That's so important. Oh my gosh.
And I had a CEO, all he cared about was getting 90% participation. In fact, I would get in trouble if we couldn't get 90% participation. It was more about participation with what the real survey was about and what people were discussing. So just a question for you, Crystal and Lee. How do you help an executive team really know what to do with that data? How do you help an executive team not get so defensive about the feedback, and help make a safe, psychologically safe environment for employees to really discuss what they really feel about those types of surveys? What are your thoughts on that?
I have a couple of things
I'm sorry, Lee. Yeah, I love what you're saying, Char. I want to peel back some of it, because there's so much depth to your experience and what you shared. First and foremost, you need employees to feel like they can provide honest feedback. So I think that's the start. And one way that we help support clients to do that, and one recommendation I would give, is to use a third-party vendor. I mean, I know that sometimes in and of itself, just having that be separated from the organization helps employees understand that this information that they're providing may be owned by the organization in aggregate, but the individual level results can't be shared with the organization and leadership team. So being able to have a little bit of distance from that. Also, we apply confidentiality and anonymity thresholds to the data so that small groups of employee data will not be visible. Typically, that's groups of 5 or more is required for that threshold to be met to protect data privacy and anonymity. We also recommend that in survey instructions, in a really tactical way, we're transparent with employees about what we'll do with their comments and open-ended feedback, and making sure that they know if it's going to be shared with a leader, that their comments will be visible verbatim. And sometimes just including that in the instructions of the survey transparently help employees know that this is okay. It's okay to share this information, but whatever I'm sharing, I need to be making sure that I'm not identifying myself necessarily unless I want to be identified. So that's just from the employee perspective, that picture from the employee perspective. Employees are also looking at how you communicate about the results once the results are available, and how you take action. If this is a punitive process in any way, or leaders feel like you're reviewing the data and it's based on a scorecard or a report card necessarily, it's going to create some challenges within your culture where that feedback is not going to be wanted to be provided. But most importantly, it's the organization and leadership team taking action on the feedback that they receive in a meaningful way that's visible to employees. And if action can be taken in a meaningful way, then employees will feel like they are seen, that their feedback is valued, and they're being heard, and they'll be more likely to continue to participate. Now, you also mentioned a piece around frequency and cadence of surveying, and creating a sense of survey fatigue. And so I like to address that piece too, because what I've shifted my mind as a leader in a healthcare organization, as well as we were taking these surveys. I heard feedback from employees that it felt like survey fatigue. We're surveying too much, but really it was about lack of actioning fatigue. Are we taking action on the feedback? We found that with Newmeasures and working with our clients, that our clients and our employees within these client organizations are very willing to provide their feedback. It's not seeing anything done with their feedback that prevents them and provides that hesitation of not wanting to continue to provide it. Why would I want to continue to give my opinion about my work experience when you're not going to do anything with it? And then the last piece I'd like to just comment on is the vulnerability that it takes for a leader to be able to receive the survey feedback. It is very vulnerable to get information and candid feedback from your team. Sometimes that can feel pointed, direct, even personal. And I really believe that all of us show up every day and try to do the best job that we possibly can. And so when we get that feedback that might be counter to how we feel like we're showing up as a leader, it can be discouraging. And so I think a couple of things that client organizations do to mitigate that is just name the discomfort in getting feedback, recognizing that it's difficult to hear at times. It can feel very personal, and also having the support and from your senior leadership team and from the CEO down to every leadership level to recognize that even negative feedback is an opportunity for learning, and how do we reframe it as an opportunity for improvement, and focusing on that continuous improvement as really the focal point, not necessarily the score itself.
I think, Shar, the elephant here, or the hot potato, if you will, is who owns the employee experience or employee engagement. And I think there is a misconception that it's HR. That's not true. HR has to facilitate maybe the processes and systems that help support that. And I think where a lot of that defensiveness comes in from senior leaders is because if they feel that they solely own it. And excuse me, we know that there often is such a disconnect between what's happening at the senior leader level and what's happening at your frontline level. And we know when there's absence of information or communication, there can breed a lack of trust. And so that is a common theme that we see. And it just, when you've got that response, I'm supposed to be creating this experience and I don't know how to do it. I think that's the other thing. I think leaders don't know how to fix it. They don't know how to do it. And so they'd rather be defensive and, throw their hands in the air or not listen. And then it's, well, we're going to stop doing surveys. Or as you said, Sam, we're in a, tough economic period. We're not going to do surveys. What's the point? So I think that, again, related to this theme of, and it takes time. I don't want to pretend that this is easy. Getting data is the easy part. Figuring out your listening strategy and how you drive change is an ongoing and very difficult process. And it requires that everyone owns the employee experience. I have to own my own engagement and experience, just as I have to own that for my team. And then we have to equip people with how to do that. And the biggest thing is getting the data into the hands of your frontline leaders, which is scary for a lot of organizations. They don't want to be that transparent. They think if they can control the message that it's not really happening, but guess what? It's still really happening. And we have to help leaders understand how to facilitate the right conversations using this data to shape that conversation, because that's how you figure out the what. I have been having that same conversation with senior leaders for almost 20 years. I don't understand. People don't get enough communication. I guess I got to do another newsletter, or I got to do a town hall, or I got to send out some emails. And there are two things that are wrong with that. First of all, you don't have all the answers. Nobody does. We have to talk to the individuals to understand what they want. And I can tell you what they don't want is more information coming at them. They want to have an opportunity for discussion, for dialogue, and feel like they're part of the conversation. And there's that underlying, sense of belonging and inclusion. So I do think those are some of the conceptual elements that have to be addressed in an organization before we can really get to, where we need to be.
What do you think, Sumit?
That's a lot of great stuff to think about, Sam. And I was thinking one about the use of technology. So we run surveys, let's say 60% people respond to the survey and we get a score of say 90% on the survey. So is your actual score 90%, or the 40% folks who did not fill the survey, are they so happy they didn't bother to fill the survey saying we don't want anything to change? Are they so upset with the organization that there's no point filling the survey, nothing's going to change? So technology or AI will not give us that answer. And that's where the human part of things, I think, comes to the fore. The second is, again, when we're lost and looking for a destination, sometimes the best thing to do is just to stop, get out of the car and ask for directions. And we don't do that often enough. Thinking Google Maps might have got us lost once, it'll help us find the way. So I think while looking at the shiny and the fancy tools, like you said, we sometimes forget that the best thing to do is to ask the people, what do you require? How can I make your life better? What would impact the human experience? And that's the second thing that I was thinking of, where you said it's tough for leaders to be vulnerable or to embrace change. And one of the suggestions that I give to my clients is that even before you think of a survey or even before you plan for a survey, it's not that you're completely in the dark about what people are, say, upset about or what they require. So maybe look at some of the low-hanging fruit. Say we've been hearing some rumbles in the organization about these 1, 2, 3 things. While we're working on the first one, we want to understand more in detail. Here's a little survey, which if you fill up, will help us in getting your perspective. And I think that really, really drives up the participation rates.
One thing that I would add on there is that you're saying, Sumit, that leaders know, they kind of know some of the themes. But what I've also found is that leaders sometimes they for instance, they just released this new program and that they just invested a lot of money into. And of course, that they've been thinking about this for months, but perhaps they didn't do such a great rollout in communication. And what the leader knows is like, this is, our people should be so happy about this. Sometimes the people don't know this at all, know it at all, and so they're wondering, there's a disconnect, right? Sometimes, and surrounding that communication. And so, do you often find this, Lee and Crystal, that there is a gap between what leadership perceives and what people actually feel?
100%. And again, there's not a magic answer of how you close that gap other than, I like what you were saying, Sumit, and we firmly believe that you've got to find a balance in organization-wide listening where we're getting quantitative data and we're able to at least trend that data. I hear what you're saying about, is it really 90% or not? The important thing is it's trending in the right direction, right? I think the relative scores, we could debate that, but are we trending on the things that we're, putting intention, effort into, as well as bringing in more of that individualized experience and having those conversations and, understanding what each person needs individually. And, I mentioned COVID engagement spiking, and it's because we saw those behaviors happen really organically and naturally in organizations. My favorite phrase that I heard during that time was same storm, different boats, right? We were all experiencing a pandemic, but all in very, very different ways. And we all needed very different things from our organization to make it okay. And organizations were doing that in unprecedented ways by having those one-on-one conversations. And so that is absolutely, a key step to making sure that we're uncovering where those gaps are. So we certainly use the quantitative data to identify gaps, and we see that all the time. And we've got to continue to focus on those one-on-one conversations, because again, that's where we can dispel myths. That's where we can challenge the story that we're telling ourselves in our heads. And you can't do that with just more top-down communication. And so, it's natural. People don't have access to all the information that you do as a senior leader. So again, we've got to make sure that we're closing those gaps with those one-on-one conversations.
A couple of just tangible examples of what you said, or your question, Sam, about where have we seen that disconnect or gap occur. A couple of things come to mind that I frequently see with client organizations. One is a perception of how well senior leaders believe that they're taking action on feedback in a resonant way with employees, and what employees see and how they perceive that actioning happening or not. So just in the action planning phase overall, there's some gaps between how senior leaders feeling like they're doing versus how employees are perceiving that. Another very specific example is around creating an inspiring vision for the future. I'm seeing this a lot with clients now, where executive teams feel like we're communicating our vision all the time in so many different forums. Why is this, why would we score less favorably than we would expect to see on that particular item? And the conversation that we typically have is, how do we cascade information in a meaningful way so that at every level of the organization, employees feel like they can connect the work that they're doing in their job role, specifically their business function and unit, to the goals and strategic plan of the organization. And so it's a really just tangible example, but it's not always about necessarily, it isn't about the senior leader communication of that vision, but it's also how are we equipping each of our managers, even direct people leaders at the front lines, to that vision and strategy, so that they understand how they contribute to that.
So I'd love to, go ahead, Smith.
Sorry, Sam. So, I mean, again, that's a very interesting idea that you were talking about earlier, of the role of HR and almost as facilitators or custodians of change. And once again, it ties in with how it's not AI resources or AI capital, it's human capital. Because the way you report information and the way you influence a leader to take action is completely human driven. So me saying 66% of our people are engaged and happy with well-being initiatives, or me saying over 1/3 of our people are feeling burnt out or are unhappy, will obviously leader down two different paths. And that's where that's not something AI can do, at least maybe not right now.
Mm-hmm. AI can provide an overall sentiment, but as you mentioned, it can't be involved necessarily in telling the story, telling the full organizational structure story and the organizational picture.
That leads to a good question I have for you, Howard. I know that you're a huge advocate in systems for efficiency and so forth, but I'm just thinking of some of those dashboards that are so important for organizations or managers to see. But where do you think that those dashboards stop, and we should take more of a human touch?
I think it's what we've all been talking about. It's the context, right? You're missing that. So the dashboards will give you a quick view of whatever it is that you're trying to measure, but it's not going to give you the full understanding or the story behind those numbers or what's driving those numbers or tell you what to do with those numbers. It's just, a snapshot at a given time.
One of the proponents and pieces that I advocate really strongly for, Howard, is around data transparency. So as you mentioned, talking about the dashboard as a tool to be able to share results. What also is incredibly important is getting the results into the hands of the people that can do something with it. And so, and the dashboard is one tool and it doesn't share the story, but making sure that frontline leaders have access to the information about the results is so critically important. And I work with a lot of clients that still have some fear about how far to go with that data transparency and who needs to be involved with seeing results. And until there's some open discussion about expanding access and permission to be able to view that information, there's really a gap there, and there's a lack of opportunity to be able to influence and impact real change.
I would love to hear your perspective on the new remote environment. I know that Shar and I are often, broadcasting from remote locations, but I would love to hear your perspective on, how should we be thinking about getting good feedback from our remote folks, and is it different than we would and those people that are in the office?
Crystal, maybe I'll jump in first and let you speak to some of those specifics that you're seeing. I think this is important to talk about a broader issue, which is what people need really doesn't vary. It doesn't vary depending on which country you're in. It doesn't vary which job you're in. It doesn't vary depending on which gender you identify with, and it doesn't vary whether you're, remote or in office. How you deliver on it is where you see those changes and those variations. So I've been remote for 13 years. The only difference is when COVID happened, I had to turn my camera on all the time. I was not happy about having to get dressed every morning. So, I've always learned how to do that. And it is a practice. And our company is, for all intents and purposes, a virtual organization. And so it takes a different level of intention to craft the culture that we want. And as we've been talking about, creating that sense of community and belonging. So how do you do that in a remote environment? That's still a need. It's still our top driver of engagement. We just have to do it a little differently because it's not going to happen organically in an office. So I would just say that, people are always trying to, focus on benchmarks and comparisons, and they want to know how things are different. And as we've been talking about, at the end of the day, we're all humans. We all have some of the same basic human needs. How we deliver on it, that's where it changes. And that, again, is up to the organization, their strategy, their locations, and how they manage change.
I know a lot of times we can get, of course, we've been talking about surveying and listening to our employees, and they're willfully giving information back to us. But of course, now there's a lot of other ways to get information from the workforce as well. And it comes under the name of surveillance, right? So where do we, what's the common state of this? I mean, is there a good way of doing this without getting, the feedback directly from employees? Maybe we're taking some sort of observation. What are your thoughts in that realm?
It makes me very uncomfortable, just off the bat. We're seeing a lot of that primarily in measuring the customer experience, where there's more surveillance and you don't have to have that same level of psychological safety. I have yet to see how we can apply that to the employee experience in a way that creates psychological safety and trust. As Crystal was saying, so many of our clients still are so fearful around this process. They are convinced that their employees won't take the survey if it's authenticated, if we can connect their responses to their personal demographic information. And yet people do want to share feedback. And so if we act out of a place of fear and distrust, we're going to perpetuate that fear and distrust. And if we can break that, and if we can act in a way of trust and showing people that we're acting on your data, that we care about you as a person and we're going to protect your data, then I think, we can create more meaningful dialogue and opportunities. So, we need to create spaces where people can openly communicate and not censor themselves. And I think that that's ultimately what would happen if we're using any kind of, AI or data surveillance tactics, at least as it applies to the employee experience today.
Perfect. Hey, Shar, I was just thinking, you mentioned a bit ago about, how you were able to get such high participation rates in some of the surveys you did. Can you shed some light on that? What was your secret sauce?
Great question, Sam. Yeah, we use Gallup through a lot of our survey processes. Absolutely. We did everything, the fun celebrations, the chocolate fondue fountains. We used to drive a little miniature car on all the floors of the hospital and give out free food. And I did all those activities, only with an $8,000 budget for 3,000 employees in one hospital, which was silly. But I mean, personally, underneath it all, I was like, the nurse that's working in the middle of the night in the ER that sees all these tragedies, they really don't appreciate always seeing people push around chocolate and biscuits. So really, it was my strategy. It was really to work with the HR business partners to really sit down and really strategically talk about the prior surveys and really building in those touch points throughout the year at multiple intervals. And ensuring that our leaders, even though they're stuck behind their computers, constantly replying to a zillion emails, to really spend more time on the floor per se, and in the work environment, and really meet employees where they were, not just sending out a bunch of emails that the employees would say, particularly in nursing. So yes, I'm from also healthcare. It's not a bunch of emails. It's not a bunch of newsletters. It's really just going out and being with your employees where they are, making sure they have potty breaks and break time to be able to sit with their leaders and really have in deep conversations. Like, what about your refrigerators? What about your water stations? I mean, just stuff that was really meaningful. Why do we not have windows in our laboratory? Whereas the big executives have all these fancy windows. Just those underlying things that would really cause deep resentment. So you have to, just in short of it, you have to be a real change agent. And like, who said that, Lee or Crystal, really painting that vision of how we're going to create a very positive workplace and an environment that appeals not just to the executives, but also to the frontline employees and their clients or patients. But yeah, I put myself in many vulnerable places and got yelled at quite a bit by the employees that were so angry, not necessarily at me, but they felt like they weren't being heard. So you have to be very strategic. So I love what you're saying, Crystal and Lee, because I too was very frustrated with some of our executive teams because I didn't feel like they were really listening. And in turn, that helps the employees listen better, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think showing up for your employees in a way that isn't minimizing the work that they're doing, sometimes, as you said, meeting them where they are, Celebrations are wonderful. Recognition is wonderful. Food is wonderful, especially in healthcare space.
Yes.
We love sharing food in all industries. It's a way to connect. And how are we representing the work and the importance and the value that we're placing and recognizing where employees are coming from? I
Well,
think,
you know,
yeah.
here's my, oh, I'm sorry, Crystal, I'm
Yes,
always
oh,
talking.
please, no, please.
No, I mean, for example, we throw a pizza party. I mean, come on. I mean, pizza party. We're in the daytime employees. We put up pizza for them in their work location. But if you were a night employee, you had to go down to the cafeteria, walk up to the lady and say, I need my free piece of pizza. So our night employees were like, so we're not being treated equitably like the day. I mean, I'm here at 2 a.m. and I have to go to the cafeteria to get my pizza. So the executive would say, yeah, we spent $8,000 this year on employee engagement processes, but we're completely missing the point, because really that was only creating more negativity. So what were you saying, Crystal?
Well, it's incongruous with what their experience is and meeting all employees in an equitable way. I think, one of the things that I'm finding is so helpful with our deskless workforce, that includes healthcare, manufacturing, and those others that are on the front lines, serving patients or clients or customers, in doing the work, is making sure that we're providing our support of them to participate in these kinds of activities too, and making sure that they have formal breaks. This isn't something that we're expecting them to do on their off time. This is something that we're making space for, and it's important, and we're going to raise that level of importance by demonstrating to them that they can do that while they're at work, and making it easy for them to access the process and be involved.
Right.
And sure, I'll just say I love your term change agent. And I think that's fundamentally why employee listening and engagement stays as an initiative. I think it's senior leaders don't understand what we're trying to do with this. They don't understand that this needs to be embedded in your culture, in your organization, when ultimately, we're trying to drive organizational performance through a compelling and differentiating employee experience. How do we do that? We have to know what the experience is. To your point, we have to know the whole experience. Why aren't there windows in the lab? Why are you making me go down to the cafeteria at 2 a.m.? It's the entire experience. It's not a point in time. What is my engagement with my role? It is understanding that whole employee experience, so that, again, individuals can thrive and then the organization will thrive. And I think if we can continue to bring HR leaders along to understand the strategic component of this is not a service offering. This isn't, a standalone solution or initiative. This is a strategic process and way of thinking that we've got to ingrain throughout the entire organization.
I totally agree with you too. This is awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lee and Crystal. I mean, it's been a really great conversation. We are coming towards the top of the hour, so I do want to point out our next week's speaker to our listeners. We're going to be hearing Andrea Papp talk about from wellness programs to creating a well-being culture. So we're going to talk about that journey next week on the People Strategy Forum. So, but one thing I want to cover before we let Lee and Crystal go for the week. I mean, it's been such great information. Thank you so much. But what do we want our listeners to take away from this conversation? What are the key points that we want them to think about during this next week?
And I think if I would summarize some of the key takeaways from my perspective, I think it's definitely highlighting the human experience, as you've heard us say over and over again, which sounds funny coming from a measurement perspective. Measurement is important, and we have to have the measurement, and we can't do it to the detriment of the individual and human experience. And again, we have to ingrain this in how we approach life and our job. This can't be a standalone initiative. And I think the more that we can equip our leaders to think that way, to use this data as insight and not as creating more to do, I think that's where we'll continue to see real traction. And, to really lay out that strategy for the organization, to be comfortable taking a step back, even if that means pushing pause on current listening to say, what are we trying to solve for and what's the best way to solve it, and then move forward with intention to build it, and then bring the technology along to support that. I think those would be some of my key takeaways.
And I would say too, don't let fear hold you back. Don't be afraid to ask for the feedback, especially during times of tremendous change with the organization. Don't be afraid to share results. Don't be afraid to include frontline leaders and managers that can help support and take responsibility for improving the work experience.
Great. Well, for our listeners that want to learn more, they want to see what Newmeasures has to offer, or kind of talk a little bit more to Lee or Crystal. I mean, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, we would love for anyone to reach out. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, we do have our engagement trends paper that you can download. We will also include my email address, and I would love for anyone to reach out. We are offering a free 30-minute listening strategy session. So if you're feeling stuck in your own current listening strategy or don't know where to begin, we'd love to talk through that with you and what that could look like. So there is my email in the chat, so feel free to ping me and would love to connect.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom on this topic. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for the
so much,
opportunity.
Pleasure meeting you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Appreciate
All
it.
right. Take care, and we'll see everybody next week on the People Strategy Forum.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.